Well, hello, and welcome once again to 25 o'clock. I'm your host, Dan Drago. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining me on the show. Here we are, Philadelphia's longest-running music podcast, I think. Anyway, welcome to the show. Great show this week. Got to talk to Keith Marlowe from the band The Miners. He was also in a band in the late 80s, early 90s here in Philadelphia called Tornado 5. They were part of the whole scene back then. I found an old calendar of the Khyber Pass, and they played the same weekend as the Afghan Whigs in 1991. So, yeah. Now, Keith's a very, very cool guy. Had a really, really great conversation with him. Talked about the Miners, their new record, and all that. We'll talk more about Keith and more about the Miners in just a moment. But as always, if you're new to the show, old to the show, medium to the show, I highly recommend you check out 25o'clockpod.com. That's the place. That's the internet place. You can do everything there. All the episodes are available there for streaming and for downloading. Sign up for the mailing list. Find us on social media. You find us on Twitter. Find us on Instagram. You can still find us on Facebook. Thus continues my will he, won't he storyline of will he, won't he get rid of the Facebook page for 25 o'clock. I don't know. I feel like talking about it is as fulfilling as not having it. So who knows? Stay tuned. You can do all this stuff there. Also, check out the Friends and Neighbors page at 25o'clockpod.com. That's where I link anyone and everyone who's ever been on the show. So if you like what you hear, you want more information about an artist, about a guest, go to the Friends and Neighbors page, click on the episode link, and there, I've done it. I've done it for you. I did it all for you. That's the new tagline for 25o'clockpod.com. I did it all for you. So go check it out. So we're rounding up towards the end of the year. Right now, here we are. It's mid-November. It's going to be December before we know it, which means the year is going to be over. I will be doing, as I do every year, a end-of-year music compilation. I've got some ideas of things I want to include, but hey, I'm only one man. I'm only one set of ears. I'm only one set of two ears. If you had a record that came out this year and you are from Philadelphia and I didn't talk about it, or you don't think I know about it, or you just want to remind me again that you did it, send it to me. Send it to me. Send me a download link. Send me something I can pull down, and send it to dan.drago at 25o'clockpod.com. Do that. I'm just starting to think about putting together what the compilation list is going to look like. And I'm going to bang on my table while I do it, too. I don't know why I kept doing that. Anyway, it's like that thing in jazz where, like, what do they say? One note is a mistake and two notes, it's jazz. That's what I do. If I hit on the table a couple more times, it sounds like I'm just trying to do it on purpose. Anyway, that went interestingly. Send me your stuff if you haven't already. Dan.Drago at 25o'clockpod.com. Send me a download link to your record. A link to your record if it came out in 2021 and you're from Philly. I want to know. Let's talk about Keith. Keith Marlowe, like I said, frontman for the band The Miners. He was also the lead guitar player, sort of band leader of Tornado 5, which was a Philly band back in the day. Great to talk to Keith. The Miners have a new record out right now. It's called Megunticook, which is the name of the lake in Maine that Keith has been going to since he was a child. You can get that at minersmusic.com. Also, the minerspa.bandcamp.com. That's all the places that you can get you can download the record. It's also available on all the streaming sites, all the digital music places. Vinyl is coming. It's coming. It's coming. You can pre-order vinyl from Megunticook right now at their Bandcamp. We talk about why it's not available right now. Spoiler, it's the same story as everyone else. Supply issues, shipping issues, and the fact that there just aren't as many vinyl plants in this country as there used to be. Keith and I talk about that, as well as many, many other things. They don't have any shows coming up before the end of the year, but Keith does touch on this in the conversation, so I thought I would highlight it here. On January 8th, They are playing as part of their own 6th annual breast cancer benefit. Keith's been doing this for a whole bunch of years. It's upstairs, the World Cafe Live here in Philadelphia. They're playing with the Bob Lowry Band. Again, that's January 8th at World Cafe Live upstairs. Get more information about that at minersmusic.com. So let's just get to it. Let's get to my conversation with Keith Marlowe of the Miners, formerly of Tornado 5, here on 25 o'clock. You've been a part of the scene here, of the music community in Philadelphia for quite some time, correct?
Yeah. Going back to, I guess, sort of around maybe 87 was when my first band really started to play clubs in Philly. So I was in college at that time.
What was the band? What was the name of the band?
The band was called Tornado 5. It was actually originally called the Unmentionables, but then there was another band in Jersey that was the Unmentionables, so we ended up changing our name.
Are you from the area originally?
Yeah, I grew up in suburban Philadelphia, and went to Temple. So
that's often the way you grow up, and if this is your closest major metropolitan area, and you are inclined to that sort of thing, then it just makes sense.
But I mean, in high school it was cover bands, and then my high school bandmates we started writing original music. And then we actually then added a singer who wasn't from Philadelphia. I mean, she was going to school in Philadelphia. And then that's when we started getting club gigs and writing original music and playing kind of the circuit back then, which was a little bit different than the circuit now.
I'm always as interested in the generation that just preceded me.
Right.
Because, I mean, growing up, at least with music and stuff like that, I was always getting turned on to music by people who were, 10 years or so older than me, and, like, getting into the stuff that they were into. So, like, in the 90s, I was getting turned on to like 80s college rock and stuff like that, like REM and Dinosaur Jr. and stuff like that.
Right.
But, like people who were older than me. So I'm always like fascinated with like what came just before me. And that's how I am with the Philly music community as well. I'm always kind of interested in like what the ecosystem looked like in the late 80s into the early 90s, because it was a time where there were a lot of great bands and a lot of cool talent, but maybe not as much national attention on the city as, like what we have now.
I actually listened to your podcast with Mike Brenner. So there's definitely some overlap. I mean, I've known Mike since back then, and he had talked about one of the first things that he had done when he came to Philly, I think was for what was then called the Welcome Mat. Was he actually like wrote this article that reviewed all these bands, these local bands, and we were one of them. And fortunately, we he was kind to us. But and then he played in some other bands that we knew or played with as well. So, but yeah, the scene back then was definitely. There was sort of two scenes. You kind of had the bigger clubs were controlled by some of the same people that were managing some of the bands that got the national attention. And then there was sort of the alternative, I don't know what you called it back then. I mean, when I talk about alternative music, I kind of think more of that 90s stuff. We were like definitely like college radio, influenced scene, which varied from, punk bands, like Electric Love Muffin and the Dead Milkmen. You had more ska-based bands, and then you had, other bands doing more, on the jangly side of things, and then. We kind of started there, and we morphed a little more into like, the Throwing Muses and Dinosaur Jr. and that kind of sound. But we were basically, playing every month Khyber Pass and JC Dobbs, And then there were other rooms like Bacchanal on South Street and Tops, which was above McGlinchey's.
Oh, okay.
You
Oh,
know, and then
wait.
there'd be all these other little, you know, and then there were some big, like the bigger rooms were the Troc, you know, which we played once in a while. But then, you know, there were like the cabarets. There were these three: the Chestnut Cabaret and 23 East, which is actually now Ardmore Music Hall, and there was one in Ambler as well. So
Chestnut Cabaret, was that in University City? Was that the one that then became Brownies? That then became, it was Brownies, then it became gosh, I can't remember what room it was, and then all those people went over to head up Ardmore Music Hall, like when Ardmore Music Hall kind of started. I cannot remember the name. The Blockley Poorhouse. That's what it was called.
it's right at 38th and Chestnut.
Yep. Yeah, like right next to that 7-Eleven.
Yeah. I mean, that was, you know, that was a good, like I saw a lot of shows there because some of the bigger band, you know, when bands got a little bigger, like the Smithereens, you know, they would play there. Um, the fortunate thing for us is like at JC Dobbs, we would play with a lot of bands that came through that were touring that were on these smaller independent labels that we loved, you know, and listened to. So, you know, Yola Tango or the Blake Babies, which is Juliana Hatfield's band. There was some other Boston bands that we loved. You know, we would just get to open for them and play with them. So it was great. I mean, when we ever played, we were there seeing, you know, friends bands opening for other touring acts. There was a lot of great support among the community, but it didn't have, you know, it didn't have what Athens had, or even Boston or Austin, Texas, you know, later, obviously Seattle, but that kind of is more towards the end of, you know, what I'm thinking of in that area. And I'm just not sure why it didn't. There were some fantastic bands that just never, you know, like Electric Love Muffin or Flight of Mavis, which became Buzz Zemer. You know, like to me, they should have had, you know, national success, at least to the extent of what some of these Boston bands and other bands did. And I'm just not sure why the Philly band just never got the support. It could have been a lack of like a real strong independent label that was based out of Philly that covered that kind of music.
Yeah, when you think of indie rock cities of like the late 80s and early 90s, yeah, Boston always comes up into my head because I think of like, yeah, Blake Babies and Volcano Suns and like, of course, now I'm blanking on all the Boston bands from the 90s that I love. But
Yeah, no, I mean, we played with this band called Big Dipper that we loved. Yeah, I mean, Starling Muses sort of came out of that era. Obviously, Dinosaur Jr. You know, so all these bands that were recording at these studios in Boston were playing those scenes, and there were a couple labels that, you know, were distributed well. You know, there were indie labels that were distributed well, and you know, I don't know what they sold, but they would come through and tour, and you know, we thought they were big. I mean, they had records and they were touring. That was, you know, that's what we wanted to do.
and that you had heard of them. So if you had heard of them,
Yeah,
then they
I own
had to
their
have been
records
something.
most likely. Yeah, you know, I was going to, you know, the record stores back in the day there, and probably once or twice a week, and buying records of these bands that, you know, and or I'm listening to WXPN was then like really like a college station. It wasn't.
Yeah, sort of before they became a little bit more of like the polished, almost NPR style station that they are now. You know, back when they were in that little house, like on
Exactly.
Walnut Street, where like they did World Cafe at a fourth floor walk up or something like that. It was, you know,
Yeah, or WKDU, with, you know, or then even PRB out of Princeton. Trenton State had a radio station. And those were some of the stations that we, you know, were able to get airplay on as well, our band.
yeah, I sort of pine for like the days of like the Blake Babies and Dinosaur Jr.
The other thing for me, and so after that, like I wasn't really in the music scene for about 10 or 15 years, but I still have a lot of connections back to that. So you know, like I started to play venues again, and all of a sudden I'm playing with some band, and there's like three people I know who used to play in bands back then. So I don't know. I guess you kind of like it gets in your blood, and you just you kind of don't give it up. At least for a lot of people.
Well, yeah, and if you stayed around, I found the trend for a lot of people, and like this is just could just be a generalization for me. Is that like people who were in bands like in the 80s and 90s when they were younger, and then they stopped, they had careers, they had children, and so yeah, they kind of take themselves out of the world for a decade or so. But then the kids get older and like can be left with people at some point, and
right.
you can, and you're just like, and you look around at your friends who are like maybe kind of in that same place that you are, like everyone's kids are about the same age, everyone's at the kind of the same place in their adulthood, careers, whatever, and you kind of look around, you're just like, I don't know, man, you want to get the band back together? And like that can kind of happen. You get like these second waves of people who are part of the scene a decade or 15 years ago, and then they kind of pop their heads back up and they're just like, yeah, let's do it again. It's this hobby. It's like if you started playing, pick up basketball again or something like that,
Yeah. So that was really kind of my entree into the Philly music scene. And like I said, it was a great, I viewed it as a great time, but from certain opportunities, including like clubs, it wasn't like it is today. I mean, there's a lot more opportunities and venues today. And and obviously that the world's changed, right? We're not tacking posters on telephone poles anymore with staple guns, to promote shows. And
I'm like of that last generation of people in bands that still, to a point, did things that way. Like we were still like going to the record stores and the coffee shops and like putting our little quarter sheets out and like asking to put up posters and still kind of hitting the streets and doing the work. I couldn't tell you when and where and there it shifted, but like there was definitely a point where I remember we were doing it one way, and then one day you look up and no one's putting posters up anymore, and everyone's on Facebook or MySpace or whatever. Yeah. And I try not to like bemoan and say like, oh, it was better one way or the other. I don't know which one was better or not. I just know at some point you didn't put posters up anymore.
Right. Well, it's easier. I mean, I look back then, and yeah, we'd send out mailers every month, and once in a while on social media, some of the like post pictures, like they still have a mailer or something from the old band, which is always kind of cool. But now you look back and like, wow, this would have been so much easier, right? Like we could have just created whatever you're on at the time, right? Facebook, and create an event or whatever it is. It's much easier, I think, to market the band than it was back then.
I think the tools are a lot more user friendly, and they're certainly more available. But then like on the other side of that coin is always that like now there's just tons more bands, like tons more people who are promoting at like the same level. Like the echo chamber is just so much louder now than it used to be, and you just get lost in it. Like, yeah. Whereas in like in the 80s and 90s, there were just, I don't know, fewer bands, but like, if you could be a club band in the early 90s, then like that was a thing. Like if you could be that Philly band that opened for, Yo La Tengo at the Khyber when they came through, like that was a thing. That was like a level of success for you to like achieve right there.
Definitely. I mean, I think, and this happens with technology and ease, and it seems like Pro Tools, right? Like you probably record, right?
Yeah.
So, the barrier to entry is, have come down so far, right? I still have an 8-track 1/2-inch reel-to-reel Tascam. That was like what we recorded on back then. We started with our cassette 4-tracks to do demos, and then we upgraded and went to studios and recorded on 1/2-inch 8-track reel-to-reel. Now you can do a lot at home, and so people are putting out stuff. You can promote your band. You don't have to work that hard, and you can get followers, especially I think when you're younger. it's a lot easier to do that. So, and then all of a sudden, there's a lot of bands promoting the same but there are more opportunities, at least. Like there are more venues and
Yeah, more venues and people like house shows, especially in Philly, like the house show phenomenon of like of more of my age group of like because you had all these houses in West Philly that people were renting that had huge basements and people just
right,
looked down. Certain enterprising like music, like DIY music people were just like, well, hell, what if we just did it here? You
right,
know,
right.
which is cool. And that kind of stuff happened in the 80s and 90s too, obviously. Like, you know, there were always DIY people being like, well, what if we just did it our way?
Yeah, definitely, definitely played some of that stuff. I mean, we go up to New York once in a while, play. We played CBGBs and Kenny's Castaways and places like that. Um, or City Gardens. We get on some show or something like that. So today, I just think like it's almost like a heyday of venues from in Philly for like, I don't know, 3,000 seats all the way down. I mean, you just, there's so many opportunities of good venues, and not just in the city, in the suburbs and places
Oh
like that.
yeah, certainly too. Yeah. You look at like an Ardmore Music Hall, or yeah, like I even still think of like Steel City up in Phoenixville,
Right.
which is still booking bands. Yeah, there's a lot more attention being paid to the city now, and there are more opportunities, more corporate interest now, obviously, than there was
Right.
back then. And that's you take that the way you need to take it.
Right. Right. It's got
It's like
pluses and minuses. Yep.
I was just saying something recently where like I was talking about the new Brooklyn Bowl in
Right.
Philadelphia and saying like there's half of me that says like come on, like we don't need another big corporate run blah 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 venue. But then I look at the opening calendar and I'm just like, "Oh my god, look at all this awesome stuff that's coming." Like, you just because like you're a fan, but then you're also like trying to think about like just the long run of like what the music community looks like and all that.
Right.
But then like but then you see a month of calendar and you're just like, I want to see 10 bands like
Right.
on that calendar.
Well,
So
as a fan, I don't know that you care. As a venue operator, I think you might care, right? Or as a talent booker, I think you might care because now there's some issues with more competition, and I think Brooklyn Bowl kind of almost fits into the slot where it's competing directly with two or three other venues right now.
it's in direct competition with Ardmore Music Hall, if you ask me. Like absolutely, it's living in that jam roots rock world right there. Because you look at the opening lineup for Brooklyn Bowl, and their first show was with Soul Live, and I look at that, I was like, well, Soul Live used to play at Ardmore Music Hall. I'm like, I guess they like, and you think about it because they're two clubs and two markets close enough together. You're just like, well, they can't do both. Like,
Right.
so but the same thing happened, I guess, like when World Cafe opened and all that, and then like the Tin Angel closed a few years later. And I often thought that like World Cafe didn't necessarily steal Tin Angel's clientele, but they definitely took some of those bands.
Right.
Because now you didn't have to play two shows in one night. You could just play, because at the Tin Angel, to make money, like you'd have to play two shows upstairs, and then you could just play one show like upstairs at World Cafe, make your money, and then like go on your merry way.
Right. But downstairs, kind of there wasn't really anything like that when it opened in Philly, like of that size.
And certainly not that level of quality
Right.
either. Like
Right.
it's it's the same size more or less, maybe a little smaller than like a Trocadero or a TLA, but certainly a much better room. Like in terms of sound,
Right.
in terms of just decor and ambiance. Like
If you remember North by Northwest at all.
yeah, up in Germantown.
Yeah. So, that was kind of like XPM was promoting shows there. Like the Jayhawks played there, and that was kind of almost like the World Cafe for them a little bit for a while until World Cafe opened.
Yeah, no, that was a super fun room, and was sort of set the tone for like what would later be like World Cafe, Ardmore Music Hall. Although 23 East was still was obviously booking at the time too, and I know some of those people. Like I know Jesse Lundy and
I know Jesse.
Guys who I don't think you can have existed for as long in this music world and not know Jesse Lundy at some point.
Well, yeah. Although I've probably more recently met Jesse actually than I mean he post dated my prior band. So I've sort of met him in the last few years.
It's fun in this scene and then in this community how you can like keep meeting new people, and not just like new young people, but like new people your age, where you're just like, oh, you've been doing this whole time, so have I. It's
Right. Through the minors and getting back into the scene, I've made, several friends, just, whether they're in other bands that we play with, even some people running clubs and promoters and things like that. Again, I've actually booked rooms and then found out like somebody I went to high school, like, owned the building or something.
yeah.
So that's always kind of a weird thing. Like, you kind of get to this different level in life, and
Some of us stayed in bands and some of us bought buildings.
right, exactly.
Yeah. So like the minors started back in like '07, right?
Yeah, which wasn't so started actually kind of by accident. I wasn't like, oh, I want to start a band. It was actually there was another guy named Matt McGuire who played in a band back in the late 80s, early 90s, our scene called the Bensons. He was playing some acoustic shows and asked if I would, join him and play guitar, maybe sing a little. So I said, sure. And we started working up some songs. And then somehow he got a gig and said, well, forget the like acoustic thing. I got us this show. We're going to do a full band thing. I have like, a drummer and a bass player from my old band. The drummer ended up not working out, and I ended up bringing in my old drummer from Tornado 5. So that's how the band started. So it was sort of by accident. We played a couple shows, and then after a couple years, Matt decided he didn't really want to do that anymore, play shows. I was digging it. I was having fun. I was singing maybe 4 or 5 songs that I'd written. I was never a frontman. Tornado 5, I was the lead guitarist and I wrote all the music. We were essentially a 3-piece with a singer. So I've always written music, but was never a lead singer, never a front person. And I just decided, and Matt's music was more, I'd say, on the power pop side of things, and I was definitely more on the all country thing. And I said, look, I'm going to keep it going. I kind of want to take this more in the alt country direction. So I started looking like for a lead guitarist, and there was a guy who played guitar, but he was learning pedal steel. And I said, would you play pedal steel? Because I really want that sound. And so then that's kind of how the band became what it is now.
Yeah. Sort of moved out of that more standard kind of jangly power pop world and into more of the alt country world, which were coexisting at the same time, sort of in their original times as well.
It wasn't like there was his songs and my song. I mean, they kind of interacted. It's just I definitely was like pulling it more in the country vein, and he loved, like, you mentioned like Grant Parker and and that whole sort of English power pop kind of scene, like that sort of his bread and butter.
Were you always like a bit of a country guy though, like just coming up, like just even when you were younger?
Not really. Sometimes people come to me, especially like in high school, and they say, when did you start listening to country music? Like in high school I was listening to Rush and the Police, and I said, well, I grew up in the 70s. So in the 70s, if you turned on AM, it was mostly AM radio back then, but there's some FM. You would turn on the dial, and there'd be a Kiss song, and then there'd be like ABBA, and then there'd be Glenn Campbell, and then there'd be like disco. Like there was no, so I was exposed to everything. So I always say, like, I think like that's where I started to listen to country. And then I liked sort of country influenced rock. When I started getting into like the college radio and the alternative stuff, I definitely liked bands, and even REM. REM we cover like Rockville, Don't Go Back to Rockville, and with pedal steel, it sounds like it's a real country song. Like if you really listen to it, and and they'd be interviewed and they'd say, oh, who's your the interviewer would say, who's your biggest influences, and they'd say, oh, Buck Owens. Okay. I ran the record store and like I'm digging out old Buck Owens albums and
Oh
buying them.
yeah, yeah,
So there was a band like the Long Riders. I don't know if you remember them. They were,
yeah.
even sort of, I mean, they preceded like Uncle Tupelo, but they were a pure all country band. And there was even a couple bands in Philly that had like more heavy country influences that were in our scene. So I always liked it and appreciated it. And then the kind of when the alt country thing kind of emerged, I really like got into that. And I always continued to write music. I ended up starting to like write into that vein. So then when the Minors started, and I had this kind of a few songs that I'd written that I'd recorded and sang on that I was going to perform, I was like, well, this is kind of what I've been doing. So that's really where the country side of things came for me. But yeah, I wasn't like immersed in like, listening to country music my whole life or anything.
Yeah, yeah, but no, your point is well taken right there. Is that like the radio landscape in the 70s into the early 80s was a little less sort of genreized,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
now there's a country station, there's a rock and roll station, and then there's like a classic rock and roll station, and then there's all the other stuff. But no, it's true. Yeah, it was just on the radio, and if it was on the radio, you listened to it. And you think of like people who had huge hits, like like Linda Ronstadt and like stuff like that, and Johnny Cash and like people Willie Nelson, like they had hits, like they were just like regular hits, not country hits, but just
Right.
like crossover
Yeah,
hits.
and then you had the Eagles, that were early on country, and I mean they kind of moved away from that. But yeah, so there was a lot of, I even like in my old band Tornado 5, I mean, there's some stuff where like, we had one song that was almost like a cowpunk song, and then there's other stuff where like, I put in these little like country like licks or rockabilly licks into stuff that was more, it definitely wasn't really straight ahead, that type of music. But there are other alternative bands or indie rock bands, whatever you want to call it, back then that were like that too, like that were throwing in like a lot of rockabilly stuff, or I was definitely into that scene as well.
That's like one of my favorite things about like the early era of like punk or post punk or whatever. I think of bands like the Blasters and X,
Right.
and like as influenced by like Billy Zoom, like being like this almost weirdo Skid Row rockabilly guitarist,
Right.
but is in like considered one of the most seminal punk bands of American punk.
And then John Doe like now does like country albums with the Sadies and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. They're great records too. Something happened somewhere in there where like that wasn't cool anymore, or like you couldn't get away with that anymore. But then you think of a band like the Meat Puppets or something like that, which are this like odd sort of southwestern jumble of like punk rock and southwestern rock, and there you are.
Yeah, no, there's a band, the Sidewinders, out of kind of that area. They were like another one that was kind of had a lot of country in what they were doing.
So you kind of find yourself in the role of fronting this band, which, as you said, like was not a role that you had ever really had before. And I'm sure that took a little bit of adjustment right there, just to kind of be the front and center guy. You strike me as a guy who likes to be adjacent to the front and center guy.
Yeah, I mean, I sang a little, but I never fronted a band, so I was like, well, okay, I'm gonna start to do this, and then I decided I better like learn how to sing. I'm not sure I can still. I don't know if I can sing now, but at least I took some vocal lessons to understand what to do. And then it was just the process of like writing songs and playing and getting more comfortable being in that role. Again, like I always wrote music. I was sort of a band leader for Tornado 5, so that wasn't. But yeah, I was never sort of like I'm going to be the person up front. And and by the way, there's a lot of artists that I appreciate that I don't think are dynamic. Like I love Jay Farrar, like he's not the
Oh
most
yeah,
dynamic
yeah.
dynamic front person, but but to me, like it's the songs that kind of do the speaking, and I don't need somebody jumping up and down and running around on stage necessarily.
You guys put out this EP, which I listened to, the EP from 2012,
Right.
The Miners EP, which is like very much in the vein of like all the alt country stuff that we've already talked about.
Right.
Like, it very much lives in that like Whiskey Town, Tupelo type of things right there. And not to immediately jump past it, but then when I listened to the new record, because I sort of juxtapose them going back and forth, and when I listened to the new record, I thought to myself, I'm like, well, this is like the difference between the first Whiskey Town record and the last Whiskey Town record, in terms of like the first Whiskey Town record is very much almost wearing country like a coat, like in a great, in a really good and like honest way. Obviously you love that music. And then this new record, you listen to it, it's like, oh no, this is your record. Like this is the Miners record. And it has all those tropes. Like it has the pedal steel, it has, the acoustic guitar and all that. But like there seems to be a real difference between the two. And obviously like 9 years went by in between the two records as well. But
right.
It's a more personal album, like just from subject matter. I know on that EP, some of those songs are like kind of in that vein of like, like there's a Union song on there. There's a couple of outlaw songs on there, which are all in that vein of, country and then later alt country. And on this new record, you've got the Black Bart song, which is like your one country, like your country
right.
outlaw song right there. And then the rest of the record, that subject matter kind of moves past the usual stuff that one could make a country record about. You know what I mean?
Well, you're the first one that's commented on that, which and I appreciate you listening to the records in that much detail. So a couple things. First of all, this album is basically everything that I've written that hadn't been recorded up until this point. So Call Me Up was written in 2008. It just didn't get on the EP. Most of the other ones, were written post the EP, but there was nothing purposeful about it. I just think it's an evolution of me being a frontman and writing songs for myself to sing. Several of those songs on the first EP were written before the Miners ever existed. And they were some of the songs that I brought in and like, well, here's what I'm doing. So they were probably, I was trying to like write some songs maybe in that vein. So maybe they kind of were a little more, obvious, I guess, of what the influence. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the other thing too is, the playing and the musicianship and the production and everything else is different. The EP was recorded in my basement on my 1/2-inch 8-track river reel. And then I mixed it at Milk Boy. But this one was more, we recorded basic tracks at Milk Boy. I did the overdubs in my home studio, and then we went back and mixed it. And there's just it's just like everything, all the musicianship is better. Not to say that the people who played on the first one weren't, good musicians. It's just like everything's better. Like my own, I think my own singing's better, guitar playing. I have a really, really good pedal steel player now, who played, dobro and even some, B-bender on one song, like more of that understanding of, of what we're looking for and what we sound like. So I think that's some of it. Some of the songs on the first album, actually, you mentioned, so Miners Rebellion, I wrote based on, like historical fact, but the other ones are actually all personal. So like Cold Steel, that actually was an event that happened to me.
Okay.
So that wasn't really not necessarily an outlaw song, but it's about a robbery. There is another song that's just sort of like a character sketch. So I guess I can see like out of the, what you're talking about. Whereas Black Bart really probably is the only one that kind of sticks out as like not a personal song or something that I experienced.
Yeah. I didn't know that on the first EP. Obviously, how would I? All I have is
you wouldn't.
Is the record. Yeah, all I have is the record to listen to and to make my own. Make one's own sort of extrapolations on that.
One more thing on the first EP too, like
Oh,
you
sure.
mentioned, Miners Rebellion, which is the name of the EP and the title track, and you said the Union song. So I wrote that song because I wanted to write something that tied to the name of the band. So I started kind of looking up, doing research about miners and things, and this story, which is basically mostly known as the Battle of Blair Mountain, kept coming up. So I kind of researched it, and I ended up writing a song that, is about these miners trying to unionize, and there was this bloody battle. I wrote it because of that, to try and tie. So we've been picked up by all these like leftist anarchist playlists on Spotify, like adding this song to like these union. So I'm not against any of that. I'm just saying it's like, people, you write a song and people look at it differently. I didn't look at it that way. I just looked at it as like, I want to write something about the miners.
Yeah, and you're just like, it's just one song. I just wrote one. We have all these other songs that aren't about unions. Like, oh, that's so funny. But that's it, because like, I mean, again, getting back into like the depths of like, various things that have come out of country music and American folk music and all that. The union song is a large part of that. Like it's sort of forgotten now, and like people almost paint country music now as a more almost right wing or reactionary style of music. But if you bring it back to the beginning, and I always think of people like Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie, Utah Phillips, people like that who were like borderline anarchist socialists.
Right.
Yeah, writing these strike songs, I feel like in the 80s, like Billy Bragg kind of brought that back again from the Irish, from the Irish tradition.
Definitely.
But those two traditions are pretty similar when you bring it back. But yeah, I get such a kick out of that like, all these people are just like, oh, they're the union band. And you're just like, I guess, like, yeah, again, you're just like, I'm not against it, but like, you don't want to like paint your guys selves as like, oh, we're the band of the working people. You're just like, well, I guess we are in the way that anybody is, but.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I make music, I write about things, and people react to them.
Things you're interested in, things that you want to know more about, obviously, or you wouldn't have written the song.
Well, that's kind of the point of art, I guess, right? Like, to impact people the way they were impacted. It may be different than what you think, and I don't write for other people, to be honest. Like, I write for myself, and hope that other people will listen to it and like it.
As I listened to the record and like, read some things that have been written about the record, and realizing like, yeah, it is sort of this culmination of just you as a person over that amount of time. And even before, like even before the beginning of the Miners, it's just these personal songs, and you just kind of put them together all on one record, and then people can kind of sort of trace what they want to trace out of it. But yeah, it definitely feels like a much more personal record than the EP.
There's definitely some deeper subjects in of some of the songs, and again, I think some of it too is I've evolved as a writer, so that maybe I express it a little differently than I did back then. Like, I write about my own experiences generally. To me, that's the easiest thing to do, and without trying to sound too corny or I was never a real lyricist. I was always a music guy, and when I write, I'm a music first guy, even now. And I appreciate great lyrics. So like, my goal is just for them not to sound like corny or terrible.
Do you think that tendency though in you to like delve more into the personal or get like more clarity about writing do you think that is something that just comes with age? Like, as you get older, you're less self-conscious, or for lack of a better term, like give less of a shit about like, sort of how, I mean, just like, you don't worry about like, oh, what are they going to think about me? You're just like, well, this happened to me, and or this is something that I think, or something that I feel, and I'm going to write a song about it. Do you think that sort of clarity of writing has sort of come with age?
I think it came more with the experience of me writing more songs where I'm writing lyrics and trying to express myself, and then maybe focusing. Like I said, I've always appreciated good lyrics, but maybe I never focused on them as much. Okay, this is a great song and I kind of don't care what they say, right? But then there's some, I mean, I told you I love REM. Who could understand anything on the first three albums that Michael Stipe was saying, right?
That's
So,
true.
I think as I evolved as a writer, then I kind of, and I've kind of worked more on writing lyrics, and that I'm singing myself to audiences. Now it's like, okay, well, let's, make sure that what we're writing, I feel good about. And I do hear some stuff that I'm amazed, like gets out there or can be popular. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is just, this is horrendous
Yeah,
from a
yeah,
lyrical
yeah.
standpoint. But
And I've always I feel that way too about certain things. But then I'll go back and listen to like the first Stooges record and be like, well, this really isn't that much better either lyrically.
right,
Like
right.
any of
No, yeah. I
because
know
because it's not about the lyrics. It's about like, oh no, this was about attitude and sound and just like and just being like a challenging record. But like if you think about it, you're just like, well, the lyrics to like, the lyrics in 1969 are like not good. Like they're not. It's not a good lyrical song, but it's also an awesome song. When you break it down. How was you guys already did your release show at this point, right?
so the album's coming out on vinyl, but we don't have vinyl yet. So I said, well, we did a record release show with no records, so that was interesting.
You're not the only ones who
I
had to
know,
do
I
a
know,
record release show without a record.
I
That's
know.
there's sort of the trend right now. At least yours is coming.
Yeah, I'm supposed to have them in a couple weeks. And when I was going through the process, which was sort of during COVID, and at first I explored it, and it was like, oh yeah, take a few months, and then like all of a sudden I'm like, okay, now I'm ready to like commit, and April or May, and places are saying, yeah, we can get to you next March. I'm like, that doesn't really help me. So,
No, it
um,
doesn't.
this place was supposed to deliver within my time period, but they had some delays on their end that was out of their control. I mean, welcome to supply chain issues, in these times. But the show,
How was the show? Yeah, I was going to say, how was the show? Was that sort of your first foray back into the live world?
no, we played one other show. We played a show at Milk Boy in August, opening for a touring act. Scott H. Byram was his name. And so this was our second show, and it went well. I mean, we played at Jamie's House of Music in Lansdowne. I don't know if you've been there. We're talking about venues earlier, right?
I have not been there yet. It comes up. It kind of comes across my radar constantly now, and so like in my head, I was like, well, I got to get out there. I have to see what this is all about. It seems like a very cool room.
It's very different than any of the I would say than any of the other venues. I mean, maybe I guess the closest thing would be 118 North, but this is more really like, it's not a bar. It's they serve food and they have a little bar, but you're sitting down like at tables facing the stage and you can eat, but it's a small room. I think it holds normally 80. They cut it down to 60 for, just to reduce capacity. We pretty much filled the room, and it was, the sound's really good. The guy who runs it was a former touring sound guy, like in the 70s and 80s, like for like Emmy Lou and Bonnie Raitt. And,
Yeah.
so
Cool.
so he's built the system and does all the sound. So we really enjoyed the venue, and the show went well. I thought we played well. So that standpoint, mission accomplished.
Yeah, and it had just been a great, just a great sort of moment of release where you finally get to play the show, and then after the last year and a half, it was probably sitting in your head even leading up to this, like, are we even going to get to do this? Like, is this even going to be a thing that gets to happen?
Yeah, and this show actually ended up was a rescheduled show that was canceled, for COVID, and it just happened to be like scheduled like a week after we decided on the release date of the album. So we just said, well, we're going to just make this the record release show versus trying to
With
figure
or without the record.
Yeah. So now I'll do a vinyl release show.
You just, well, that's going to be the thing right now. Like everyone who put out records kind of amidst COVID and did digital releases or whatever, and they couldn't do it. It seems like they're all getting around to kind of like playing the show that they meant to play a year ago. And then now with the vinyl shortage, it's like, well, we get to do another one. You just keep,
right.
And it's, you might as well, it's like you put all that work and effort into the record. You might as well do a lap or two. like
Yeah,
on
yeah.
on the one record instead of just putting it out and being like, okay, I guess that's done.
Right, right. Yeah. No, I mean, I have the test pressing, so it's in process, and we have some pre-orders waiting for delivery, so I'm kind of anxious to to get it.
I don't know if you saw like sort of what was kicking around on social media recently amongst at least DIY bands is everyone getting mad at Adele because there was some tweet out there that they're like, oh yeah, they have 500,000 copies of her forthcoming record on vinyl in a warehouse, just ready to go.
Right.
To which all the DIY bands are just like, I can't get vinyl for another 6 months, and you're telling me that this record there are 500,000 copies, not only in production but done and
Right.
sitting in a warehouse somewhere, and everyone's kind of scratching their heads, being like, could that maybe have a little something to do with why I can't get my vinyl right now?
Right. Yeah.
It's sort of turning into this thing where like not only is there scarcity, but then like people will shame the larger corporations that have access to like what little resources are left out there, which as you and I both know is just a tale as old as time right
Right.
there. So
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah, I know kind of how an artist's mind can work, where this record's out right now, but you're probably already thinking about other things that you want to make and other songs that you already have written that aren't even on this record.
Show wise, we don't have anything until January. We January 8th, we're at World Cafe, which we've been doing a breast cancer benefit that I put on. I guess this will be the 6th year of his rebook of canceled show last year.
Yeah.
We do that upstairs, and all the money goes to a certain breast cancer charity. And we've pretty much sold out upstairs every year we've done it. So that's the next thing we have on the calendar. Trying to maybe work something in before that, but I'm not sure if that's just going to happen. You start to get towards the end of the year and holidays.
Yeah.
And so that's what we have, from a live standpoint. And then, music wise, I said I'm not writing another song until this album is complete, because I didn't want to start writing songs and then be like, maybe I should put this on the album, or maybe I should. And by the way, this album I joked that this album's taken longer than Boston's third album. If you've ever heard that story.
Yeah, it took a long time. Yeah.
Like once we got started and I finally got people into the studio and I finally got the process, I'm just like, I just want to focus on getting this album done, over the finish line. So now I kind of feel like that's off my shoulders. Then I probably will start thinking about, writing. Not to say that I don't, playing guitar, I'm like, this might be an interesting riff, and just, throw it down even on my iPhone or whatever, just to have it so I don't forget it. But I feel like, yeah, maybe I would start writing a few more tunes, and, and then, live, like we'll add new covers and play around, like we always like to do a couple interesting ones. We just added a Tom Waits song as one of our covers. Kind of goes actually well. Like I usually kind of put that back to back with the lead song off of Megunticook, Without You. Yeah, so I'm always kind of looking we like to kind of do stuff that's a little, offbeat, or traditional country like stuff, because not always our fans are listening to that stuff, and I like to throw something out there, because you get all the, I don't really like country music, and then you play a song, oh, that was a great song, as a cover, like that's George Jones cover, or
Yeah. Yeah.
or even worse, oh, I love that Dead song you played. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, oh, like, that cover. I'm like, yeah, that's a, whatever, a Buck Owens song, or like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
like the Dead may have covered that, but that's not a Dead song.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Keith, thank you so much for talking. Like I said, the record is outstanding. I really, really do enjoy it.
Thanks. Thanks again for having me. I appreciate you taking the time to listen and to take time out of your schedule to talk to me. So, and it sounds like maybe we'll be going to shows or something together, or
well,
at least see you somewhere, and I'll be like, oh, at the next Sunvolt show or whatever it is, right?
Yeah, I was about to say, well, we'll run into each other at the next Sunvolt or Jay Farrar related thing. It's been a while since I've seen him, so like I'm due.
I think they're coming in March to Ardmore. I think I saw that.
Oh, cool. I love seeing shows there. It's just such a relaxed and cool place to see.
Yeah, it's a good. I was actually there last week seeing Hayes Carl. Do you know him?
No, I don't.
It was really, really good. Like alt country. Yeah, I've never seen him. This is the first time I've seen him, but I've always enjoyed his music. It was very good. But Ardmore I tend to go to because they kind of bring in the kind of music that I like.
And it's an independent venue. It's always interesting. It's more led by taste. I mean, or it's less led by, well, these are the artists and stuff in this particular, corporate world. They're just the bookers and talent buyers there just look around and they're just like, all right, what's cool? And they bring it in. And they take chances on things that maybe, other places might not take chances on. And they always seem to line the bills with good locals and like try and keep that going as well. And offer a great stage for locals who like want to kind of jump up to that next level. It's always great to see that.
Yeah. I mean, we always try, we've played downstairs at the Royal Cafe, opening for touring acts. And, those are always great. Sometimes the issue is, like a lot of acts tour with support, so you just don't get those opportunities. So some of the bands I'd love to play with, it's just not going to happen because they're always going to bring the label's always going to put their support on it. But
it is nice to be able to it's nice that there are venues that still make that effort to just be like, no, we want to get a local on, we want to showcase the thing that's going on here as much as it is bringing in the other thing. Because, it's all, to me, it's just all part of like just the richer general community right there, is that if we can show off everything, then like, everyone stands to win. Thanks so much, Keith, for talking. It was great.
Yeah. I enjoyed it and enjoy your podcast. I have listened to several of them. So,
thank you. Well, thanks so much, man. Take care.
All right. Have a good one.
Well, that's the show for this week. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Keith Marlowe of The Miners and Tornado 5 for talking. Great time. The new record's called Megunticook. Go to minersmusic.com or theminerspa.bandcamp.com. You can still pre-order that vinyl. You can still pre-order the special edition vinyl. So get on that at theminerspa.bandcamp.com. And don't forget, January 8th, World Cafe Live upstairs, 6th annual breast cancer benefit that the Miners are putting on with Bob Lowry Band. That's January 8th. It's coming. It's coming sooner than you think. End of the year's coming sooner than you think. Like I said at the top of the show, if you're a Philly band, you put out a record in 2021 and you want me to know about it, don't think I know about it, want to remind me about it, send me a download link at dan.drago at 25o'clockpod.com. Get it to me. Starting to think about putting together my compilation episodes for the end of the year. Did he say episodes? Did he pluralize it? Will there be more than one? I have a feeling there will be more than one. I think this year, more than any other year, there are a whole lot of records that got put out, and it would be a criminal of me to give any of them short shrift simply for time. Got all the time we want. So yeah, send me your records, dan.drago, 25o'clockpod.com for the end of the year compilation. Yes. Going to leave you with a track from the Miners' Megunticook. This is a song called Walnut Lane. I enjoy it very much. I hope you do as well. It's 25 o'clock, Philadelphia's longest running music podcast, I think. My name is Dan Drago. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Enjoy this track from the Miners. Walnut Lane from the new album Megunticook.
the scenes come on by any time of day. See you coming a mile away. Rich white kids cross the county line, looking to score another dime. Up to the window, give you 3 to go. Another little secret that the folks won't know. Just took a ride down a walnut lane. When I drove by, it still looked the same. Reminds me of all the things we used to do. Take your money and then run inside, back with the baggie ready to fly. Seems back then we had a different point of view. 10 bucks get you all that you need. Don't have to worry about a mouth to feed. Glad you're not on the other side. No idea what it's like to survive. Street like this in nearly every hood. Kids not doing what they should. Dealing right there in broad daylight. Never seem to see a cop in sight. Just took a ride down a walnut lane. When I drove by, it still looked the same. Reminds me of all the things we used to do. Take your money and then run inside, back with the baggie, you're ready to fly. Seems back then we had a different point of view. Just took a ride down a walnut lane. When I drove by, it still looked the same. Reminds me of all the things we used to do. Take your money and then run inside, back with the baggie, you're ready to fly. Seems back then we had a different point of view. Well, I just took a ride down a walnut lane. When I drove by, it still looked the same. Reminds me of all the things we used to do. Take your money and they'd run inside, back with the baggie, you're ready to fly.